an entire month dedicated to women and the plight of equality, because when we talk of it as a plight, one reads many articles that in fact call gender inequality a pandemic that affects every single country in the world. You know, the more you read, the more you realize that even though we are in a bad situation in terms of where women are and how far women have come over the years, when you open up and read about other countries and where women are, there is not a single country in the entire world that has achieved gender equity. That is a statistic and a comment that I think all of us need to swallow very, very hard as we munch on our cornflakes this morning and sip our coffee, because that is a harsh reality. Not a single country in the world has achieved gender equity. Now, when you look and you imagine sitting around a table coming up with the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN, and number 5 is gender equity, and that is meant to be attained by 2030. How is that possible? How in this world are we going to achieve that? It's a question we ask every single year, and it's a question we once again ask in 2024. But I'm not here to have a soliloquy on this. I have got an incredible panel of guests that have assembled here with us this morning to give us their views, to give us their personal experiences, and talk to their expertise in the respective fields that they work in. So let me introduce them to you one by one, and then we'll get their views on where they feel we are as a country in 2024 when it comes to gender equity and how we are performing in the space. So let me begin right on the end and start off with my first guest and just ask for your opinions in terms of where you feel we are, how you think we're doing, and whether or not we're on the right track. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. And let me begin with our first guest, Colleen, on the right at the end there, please.
I actually think that in this year, 2024, we have to acknowledge that we're not in a place that we want to be. We haven't achieved what we set out to achieve. And yet I think, you know, for everything where there's a doom, there's a silver lining. And I think that with the activism that has been held in the past, and with consistent, deliberate work going into the future, we will see parity. I always say that the World Economic Forum, 135 years to parity, I won't be around in that 135 years. I want it in my lifetime. Yeah. So I think we're on the right track.
Okay, we're on the right track. Colleen Larson, the CEO of Business Engage, thank you very, very much. Lindy, let me come to you now. Lindy, of course, our panelist right on the end, Lindy Dlamini, executive head at Rodin School, amongst many other hats that you do wear, and also within the corporate field as well. Lindy, where are we? How do you feel?
I think it's a tale of two halves. We've made some strides in terms of representation. We've made some strides in terms of ensuring private schools in particular have had a drive towards ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we are starting to see private schools look more and more like the societies that we're in. If we look at broader society, those gains have been eroded by a host of societal ills. Gender-based violence is a scourge that continues to decimate our society, despite having the most progressive constitution. And we still have way too many young people who don't have access to quality education, who don't have access to opportunities that would help them to continue to thrive in this economy. And young women bear the brunt of that more than anybody else. So there's still a lot to be done.
Yeah, there certainly does. There's a lot of work in every field. Nikki, let me come to you. Nikki Galacto is the director of Nikki Galacto Attorneys. From what you see, how do you feel?
Thank you, Leanne. I think that the last 30 years there's been a lot of focus on racial discrimination and not enough focus on gender inequality. And there are a lot of organizations and initiatives being taken to mentor young women, to elevate them in terms of leadership. And I don't think we can ignore that there have been attempts to introduce reforms in legislation. But are we where we need to be? No, we're not. And there's a long, long road still to go.
There certainly is a very long road ahead. But Muritambi Ravele, founder of SA Women and Sports Foundation, because you know, our attention at the moment very much so on sports. It has been this year an exceptional sporting year. We've got our athletes and incredible sports women and men at the Olympics. How are we doing? And when you look at the picture at the moment?
I think we're doing very well. It's not what we would want to be, but there's a lot of improvement, especially looking at the fact that in this country, in the 30 years, we managed to challenge government when it comes to the act for women in boxing. And women now today are allowed to box, whilst they were not allowed to. And moving forward, I think we see more women now participating in sport in all sectors, in all areas that they want to participate in sport. There are no barriers that limit them from participation. But I think, and I'm talking from a policy point of view, that there are no policies that restrict women from participating in sport. So what we advocate for women is to see more women on television and getting more sponsorship and taking up decision-making positions. And we've seen that, we've pushed it in SASCOC, where today SASCOC have 50-50, actually 60% representation of women in their board. And I think in years to come, I'm quite convinced that we will reach that gender equity very soon. But we just have to keep on pushing and not relax thinking that doors are open. They are not open. We have to push them.
Yeah. I'm going to quiz you. I'm going to quiz you a lot more, particularly in sports, because that one is in our face and in everybody's faces.
Actually, what I forgot to tell you is that I think also what we should celebrate is the fact that for the last Olympic and these Olympics, we are seeing women bringing back medals. And I mean, today, we have a gold and a silver from a woman. Yeah. And the other bronze are from men.
Absolutely, and from the same woman. So and we've still got ladies that are out there. And we may hope for more medals to come home. We live in hope and dreams. But Gillian, let me come to you now, because a former colleague, you worked in this industry. You worked at the SABC for many, many years. You're now with Section 27. Talk to me about your point of view on where we're at.
So, Leanne, we must also remember that we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Some say, like 70 decades on, we are standing on the shoulders of women who used the power of activism to bring about change. 30 years on, we are able to vote, something that we couldn't do before. But it's still marginalized women who are at the cold face of not being heard, who are not being included in spaces where they should be, where they are able to speak up against the injustices in their community. While collective action in activism has really allowed us to amplify our voices, we, as women, when we want change, we can turn to collective action, and that has been a win in the corridors of activism.
And we'll, again, dig deep into that. So we've gotten just a very brief outline from each of our panelists of where they feel we're at. So, Lindy, let me come back to you now and get a little bit deeper into this, because, I mean, you, of course, are experienced, well-respected leader, being in non-profit organizations, being in massive corporate sectors as well. So you can speak from a very balanced point of view, but I think where we're going to really pick your brain is on the education sector as well, and looking at private schooling, because that's where you're at, and Rodine in particular. So why is it important that we have discussions like this? Why should we, in this day and age, still be talking gender inequality? Because many tune in and say, oh, there they go again, talking about this, like enough is enough. No, it's not enough. It's not enough, and we never will stop speaking about it until we're satisfied with where we are. And we can never be satisfied where we are, because this is not good enough.
Absolutely.
So let me get your views.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the first things that the students asked me when I came into the school last year is, why do we still see so much gender equality? And when they've looked at my career, they said, you were the first this year, you were the first this year. Are you happy about that? And I had to emphatically say, no, it's a dissatisfying thing. It's something you can't receive with perhaps the honor that some think it is, because it shows the slow progress of things. years and years have shown that we've got an increasing number of graduates who are girls and students participating and doing really well. When you look at high school results, the top 5 is dominated by girls' schools, almost without exception. And so where is it that they get beaten down into submission by either patriarchy, inequality? It is critical that we continue to have this discussion. Sustainable Development Goal 5, where it references gender equality, also talks about what it will require for there to be gender equality, and that's access to science, technology, mathematics, the arts these days, and we focus a lot on that in Rodin, and we do particularly well. It was quite exciting to hear that the school tops esports now, which is an emerging discipline in sporting. But we continue to dominate these spaces, but allowed a crack. It's almost like a drip feeding of access and equality. It's almost as if by becoming more equitable and equal, somebody else loses a piece of the pie and a bit of privilege. And that's not how it is. I think the World Economic Forum's work has shown us that equal societies, progressive societies, require equality and the correct treatment of women. We have representation in all functional parliaments. Last year that was the statistics, but it will take another 80 years till we have equal representation. And so in our space, we are working to make sure that these young ladies are ready to take up their space in the world.
Important, there's just one comment that you said that's just stuck in my brain, and it's hard for my brain to move on when I hear something like that. Girls do so well in matric and in school, and they study, and they blow the lights out, and you see the top performers are young girls getting brilliant marks, and then they move on, and something happens. What happens, Colleen? Why? Is it? What happens? Help me.
I'm actually not sure, because we were actually talking about this when I was having early on with one of the ladies, and I was saying to her, you know, if you look at even young girls and mothers at home, on how many balls we juggle, and how much we achieve, and what we do at home, and how much we get done, and how we stretch the rand to make sure that everyone's fed and the whole village is fed, and then we get into the work environment, and it's like something happens that I don't know what I'm doing. And I do believe, though, Leanne, that where we've gone wrong is we totally profile only the CEOs, chairmen, you know, anybody that has really got a title. And yet what I think where we've lost sight is that we haven't developed a ladder of role models, so that you walk into the work environment and I know somebody just one step ahead of me has achieved, so I can achieve. But yet we look at that CEO and we think, will we ever get there? We don't know the story. All we know is that they've achieved. And so I think the true story about somebody's journey, how they've overcome obstacles, how they've had challenges, and yet they've brought a support structure around them and they've managed to achieve. Those are the stories we don't hear. And I think until such time as we start telling those real life stories, we will not see the change.
Okay, let's start telling those stories. So I'm going to go off script now because, you know, we all know where we're at. We know the numbers, we know the figures, but I want to know, we've assembled a panel of incredible women that have managed to break through. We're not, by no means, and I speak like this, every day is a battle. Every day I wake up and I'm like, oh, now what's going to happen? You know, people look at you and think, oh, you guys have made it. You've done so well. Look at you. You're on TV. You are CEOs. You own your own company. That's unbelievable. And yet, internally, you know what you've done to get here and the challenges that you've faced getting there and the challenges you face every single day when you wake up. So, Nikki, let me begin with you. I'm getting personal with you right now. You own a company. You've got a law firm. That's unbelievable. But you didn't wake up one day and open the doors and open up a law firm. How was it for you personally? What was it like?
Leanne, I think my story is an interesting one because I just did it.
Okay.
I didn't focus on the barriers, I can say that women in law do have to work harder. You do have to prove yourself. There is an old boys club of networking where, you know, men kind of want male lawyers. And I run an all-female firm. So it's interesting because most of our clients are male, and we deal with the most senior of executives. And I'd probably say 1 in 5 is female. So even though we're an all-female firm, we're surrounded by men. And you can see, I don't have it now, I can say that, but you know, developing as a lawyer, I know I had to work harder, but I just did it. I didn't have mentors, I didn't have sponsors, I didn't have people to look up to. I just knew what I wanted to achieve and I did it. But there were barriers, there were hurdles, and it's sad to say that a lot of those challenges remain today. We haven't overcome all of those challenges. But I make sure with my young lawyers that it's not just about teaching them how to be great lawyers. It's about teaching them life skills, because you have to be able to walk into a room and carry yourself and demand the respect and demand, you know, that people acknowledge you for who you are and what you can achieve.
So you mentioned that the barriers that you went through are still there today. Give me one, just one barrier that perhaps we can highlight and say, this is so easy to get rid of. You spoke about the boys' club, and I think that exists in every single industry. It doesn't matter what industry you mention. And this is not something where we're sitting and saying, you know, anti-men. It's got nothing to do with men. We are not talking about it, but it is a well-known fact. The boys' club keeps the boys' club strong, but it's hard to break into it. So what is that thing that is still existing from when you were studying that's there that we can overcome?
I think that women need to be promoted equally, and I think obviously, as we've discussed many times, you know, equal pay. I think that's one of the areas where we can advance women, and I think there's no reason why women are still being treated. You have men in the same positions, and they're being paid more. They get promotions easier. They get bigger matters, and I'm talking in private law firms.
Yeah, indeed, and I get that, and I think many do. I mean, there are statistics out there talking and breaking it down globally to the cent of what women earn in comparison to men, and it's a shocking number. It really is. I'll try and find it in and amongst all my research that I was doing, but it's not good, and it doesn't make sense. So before we stop for an ad break, I'm going to come to you, Muditambi, because you're in a very interesting field as well. And I know I want to get personal with each one of you, so perhaps I can do that as well. You know, in the sporting world, you know, when you walk in representing female sportsmen and you're up against the rugby Springbok team, come on, how do you get your voice heard? You know, and let's be real, love the Springboks. We all love the Springboks. They are, you know, they're the ultimate, they're the world champions, they bring us together, we revere them, but you're coming in from the women's sporting side that struggle every day to even put food on the table. What's it like for you in this industry?
It's not easy. Whilst it's not easy, I think that's a way to work it around. And you learn this through the process, that you have to go in the room and identify men who could actually be on your side on issues that you are bringing. And there are men who actually who are driving women empowerment. And as soon as you identify them, make sure that you move with them. I have seen that happening in most of the areas that I have served. And I will give you the recent one with Cricket South Africa. I was appointed with 14 men, and I was the only woman. And people who elect board members are men. But in the next round of rotation, they managed to bring in 2 women. And it was because I lobbied them. And again, when we moved to the next circle, they appointed another woman. So I think it's actually an issue where we need to be strategic on how do we deal with these issues. Because when we don't have power, we need to get power from somewhere else. And power, we can get it from men who are actually are liberated, and I want to see change.
Love that, and it's so important because it's broadcasts like this where, you know, you may be walking past the television screen as a CEO, as a chairman, as a businessman, and you hear these stories and you think to yourself, I actually didn't know that. I didn't know that, and perhaps I can make a small change because it is up to each one of us. We're going to continue this discussion. We need to take a break. Gillian, you're up next. I'm going to get personal with you too, and everyone else that's sitting here, because it's the personal journeys that make a difference. Stay with us here on Morning Live. Tomorrow is Women's Day here in South Africa. It's a day that's dedicated to remembering those ladies that bravely took to the streets, marched to the union buildings against the past laws here in South Africa during the apartheid time. 1956, incredible women that took their lives into their hands to ensure that they created a better future for themselves, for their children, and for future generations. And that's what we continue to do in 2024. As much as we want to believe that we've come a far way, and we certainly have, because in South Africa there are opportunities at every corner you look at. However, those opportunities are also faced with metal doors because we just don't know how to break through them. And this is the conversation that we need to carry on pushing. Gillian Pillay, I'm going to come to you now because you obviously had a moment to think about things as well and talk about a journey, because I mean obviously you started off in journalism and then you've moved to Section 27. That is a very important organization, protecting the rights of many people. But you know, when you sort of look at your journey up to now, was it easy, difficult? What was it like for you as a young woman?
I think, Leanne, everybody on this panel has a story of struggle, of hardships, of many twists and turns to get out to where they are. My story is no different. I mean, breaking into journalism, and we know it's all male-dominated areas. Women have to work twice as hard to get that top story, or to go on abroad trips, to go to Syria to report on war-torn, or to report on humanitarian crisis, or to climb Kilimanjaro like what we did. Those were previously all male-dominated areas, and women have to work twice as hard. We heard Colleen speaking about how women, when we leave here, we're either going to juggle many different roles, or you're going to step into an office where you have to put all those other hats aside and you have to take up this hat of an activist. And you have to come down to the level of the people that you are dealing with. And you've got to put on that humanity and a hat of empathy, a hat of relating to people, even though you're not in tune with their stories because they have a different lived reality to what you have. So you almost have to come down to that level, and that is hardship in itself. To be honest and true to serving the people that we do, to ensure that these basic rights are upheld. And that's what the women did of 1956. And they threw us this lifeline, and we have to pick up that baton every day. I mean, women go to healthcare centers, and they are turned away because they are unable to get abortion services. Why are we seeing that still today? Why are we seeing still children dying because they fell into a pit latrine? Why are we still seeing the reading levels within schools at such shockingly low levels? There are a plethora of issues that in 2024 and onwards we have to talk about. We can even look at the GNU and look at the positions. Women have the voting power, but women are not in that stronghold. It's still very male-dominated, and even though we are being put into those positions of power, do we really have a voice? And are we using that voice? And how are we using that voice? But more importantly, to effectively bring change to the marginalized, who are the most disenfranchised group, and they continue to be, Leanne.
Yeah. Indeed, and these are important issues as well to look at and talk to. And I love you speaking from that journalistic point of view, where it's like, no, you can't work on that story. You're a girl, it's too dangerous. You can't go out there. You can't climb a mountain. You're a girl, you're too dangerous. But it's done. It's happened. And a precedent is set. And that's what the big thing is precedent setting. If they can do it, I can do it, and I see you doing it, which means it's possible. You walk into a boardroom, Lindy, because you're now one of the non-executives or executive at BP. And that is, wow, it's a tough industry. You walk in there, and the room is still dominated by men, whichever way you look at it. It is. Everybody has said that. What is it like for you internally as you walk in there and you need your voice to be heard? Obviously, you're in a top position now, which is a lot easier. But when it first happened, when you were first moving into these boardrooms, what did you have to do to be heard? Because if you scream, that's just typical of a woman. She's hormonal. Or if you lose your cool, it's all hormone. It's that time of the month. These are the kind of things that are thrown our way. But for a man, it's fine to speak like that because that's authority.
So I'm really proud to say BP South Africa is more transformed than its peers. The CEO, Diallo, has been at the helm for a couple of years and does an amazing job, so I'm proud to be a non-executive there. And yet, yes, that is the story of so many women. You correctly point out that we stand on the shoulders of the giants who marched for our rights in 1956. And generation upon generation stands on the shoulders of the next generation. Our question is, how are we going to be the foundation on which the next generation stands? I'm really proud that I've had the positive association with flag bearers like the International Women's Forum of South Africa. They were the midwife that made it possible for the president to launch the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund, using their ability, their power to be a force of impact that reaches the furthest parts of this country where women are marginalized, where women suffer greatly but don't have access. I am tremendously proud that RMB Group CEO today is Mary Vilakazi. The largest operating division in Standard Bank is led by a woman, Funeka Monjane. I'm very proud of people like Cindy Mabaso, who are working so hard to expand and give opportunities to women CAs. And so the moral of that story, we don't know the story behind the glory that we see, but we know what they do today to enable and facilitate the careers of other women. And so for me, that was the clarion call that led me to Rodin, to say that next generation, how can I become the shoulders on which they stand? And what are some of the things that I can do in my lifetime? Colleen correctly pointed out, we want to see all of these things in our lifetime. It will require each of us to sacrifice a little bit, to go through some of these battles and prevail, if not only for ourselves, for the next generation.
Fantastic. I love that. I really do. I want to get now into Colleen, from your point of view, and I want to talk about the face of poverty, which we do know is that of a woman, and particularly an African woman, where we look at, again, I mean, I promised I wouldn't throw too many numbers, but I have to. 380 million women and girls are living in extreme poverty. You know, just in our heads, you know, we throw numbers out, but when you put a face on every single one of that 380 million, and it's a woman and a child, we're in big trouble as a world. Economic freedom, economic participation, it is a big problem for women, and I'm saying at every single level. Those that just can't get into the economy, women that are at home trying so hard to find a way, and women that are quite well developed and yet are still dependent on their husbands for that freedom. I don't think about the money stuff, I leave it to him. There's huge gaps, we know that it's a hugely unequal society we live in, but in each society there is a problem when it comes to economic freedom. Perhaps you want to touch on that for us.
Yeah, even with regards to our gender mainstreaming awards that we run, there was a lady that comes from the Vaal area doing the most phenomenal work. And yet we even had to give her money to go from there to Johannesburg for the event. But yet she is achieving the most amazing things. But Leanne, I do come back to it again. If nobody knows who she is, she will never grow into the mainstream of others being able to support her in terms of what she does. I remember many years ago we used to do some work with a lady that used to make the most amazing pots that stood this high. And I said to her, okay, so how much do you charge for those pots? No, 250 Rand. And I'm saying to her, 250 Rand for these pots they go and sell for 4,000 Rand. You cannot charge that. She said, but that's all that they will pay me. And I said, no, we're having an event. You bring all your pots, you display them on one condition. You don't charge less than 1,000 Rand per pot. And she said, oh no, I can't do that. And I said, no, you can. And she did. She sold every one of her pots, and she then, DTI was part of our event, and she was then taken internationally. That is what I think each and every one of us has to look at. It's not about the numbers. We cannot create a revolution overnight. But every single one of us looking at somebody and saying, I can make an impact in that person's life. Because the minute you make an impact in one person, that impacts that community, impacts their families. And I do strongly believe in collaboration. I think as women, we've done ourselves an injustice by trying to, all of us doing things individually. And the more we can bring together, collaborate, grow opportunities, I think that is when we will see the impact on the ground.
and fight for each other. And I think it's something that we tend to forget to do for each other. Because sometimes I think we get to a point where we're fighting so much for ourselves that you forget that there is a woman sitting next to you that's going through the same battle. And yet, as a force coming together, it could be one of the solutions that we still haven't come together to do. Nikki, from your side, you're a business owner, and a very beautiful business owner, saying that you're entirely women and your biggest client base is men. Love that, love that. I think that's important, which shows you that, you know, that's just the way it is now. You go for the best, and it doesn't matter if the best is a woman or a male. It doesn't matter. But what do you do in your company to try and assist? I mean, very much so what we just heard now is that some just don't get opportunities. Do you give opportunities? How do you assist in trying to help women?
As I mentioned earlier, Leanne, I never had a mentor, I never had sponsorship in my career. So I give the lawyers those opportunities. As I said, I teach life skills. But I also say to them, even though you're young, focus on your own brand, not just looking at the firm. Go out and create your own brand for yourself. I've mentored for almost the last 30 years of democracy, so it's been a long time of mentoring lawyers who have gone on to achieve around the world. And it gives me really great pleasure to see what they've achieved. As Lindy mentioned earlier, I'm also sitting on the board of the International Women's Forum of South Africa. And through them, we do a lot of mentoring and leadership, currently focusing in the finance sector. So I've moved out of just mentoring in legal. And we really focus on management level and executive level, because these are the leaders we want to be the future Minister of Finance, the future CFOs of big public corporates. So we're really taking, as Colleen said, we can't work independently, collaborate. And there are actually many organizations out there. We just need to find a way to put the network together. So in my firm, I think the lawyers there get many opportunities. If I have a client who comes to the firm to see me, I will always take in a junior lawyer, and after a while I'll make sure that client will only then contact the junior lawyer, and I step out of the matter. And so we go on. And I empower them. I give them the voice that they need.
Okay. You want to add a bit onto that?
Yeah, please, Leanne. I also think we mustn't underestimate the role that men play in the conversation. It's not only about the women. I've got a saying, I don't know of any man that sits in the morning and says, let's see how we get women down today. They're far too busy doing business. But I think, men play a huge role. And what we've got to understand is it's not women's issues. It's a fundamental business issue that if you do not use 100% of your talent, you're not going to be doing effective business. Yeah. The men play a vital, important role. And so from a mentorship perspective, from a sponsorship perspective, we must be careful not to leave the men out of the conversation.
They have to hear this conversation, and that's why it's so important. And there are many men that tirelessly work to empower women. Let's never, ever, because as I think I said it again, disclaimer, this conversation is not to do with men. It hasn't got to do with men, it's got to do with women. And they are, but they do need to be a part of it to know, what women are going through and the struggles that we do face every day, which is immense. And many of them are the decision makers. And so let's talk about corporate partnerships and sponsorships. And I think sports is a great example, because you look at sporting teams and women's teams that struggle to find sponsorships, that you see them performing and we scream for them on the field, and then they walk off the field. They cannot pay for a thing. They can't pay for petrol. They can't pay for taxi fares. They can't have a home. Their children are struggling. They are struggling. Because we don't have professional leagues. They don't get paid for what they do. They have to work nights, practice days. I mean, these are things that we expect the impossible. Corporates and their view on women's sports and basically the empowerment of women. Let's talk to that, because it's still a big struggle.
Yes, Leanne, it's a very serious problem. it's actually not in line with performance of women. As I said earlier, in the last Olympics, people who brought in medals were women. And this Olympics, the person who's leading is a woman. We had our cricket team performing so well, reaching the finals in their World Cup, T20 World Cup. We had Banyana performing so well in CAF and also going to the World Cup. So they are doing so well in their participation level. But I think sponsors are not coming on board. I would have thought by now we would be having big sponsors running after these women. And you look at some of the sporting codes, male sporting codes, that even individuals have got personal sponsors. They are sponsored by car dealers and whatever, and women don't even get that. And I think that's a serious issue that we need to sit down and discuss to say, what are the problems, what are the issues, and possibly we need to listen to sponsors to say, what is your problem in sponsoring women's sport, so that we can actually address those issues. But I get more frustrated because of, if you check at most of companies, there are women sitting in those boards. And I would have expected them at least to push for women's sponsorship. And it's actually not coming, and possibly we should try and understand what are their real challenges in pushing for sponsorship for women.
And that's an answer we would love to hear, because you know, when the decisions are made, I know a corporate wants to have their branding on the best of the best, but we have the best of the best. I mean, let's just take Banyana. And yes, they do have sponsors. We do know that there are committed companies that do put their names and money to it. And yet it's still, it pales in comparison, that they're still struggling. I mean, you'll have the Springboks that have their entire families flown down. They, to be with them, to support them, and they accommodated, and they are fed, and they have cars, and they have this and that, and endorsements, and yet the women, they're out there on their own, and they have to find people to look after their children. I mean, this is the reality, that we just, there's something not right with the balance here, and that is a big problem. It's the corporates in all of this. Gillian, I don't know if you want to weigh in on this conversation.
Just before
Please, if you'd like
came
to,
in, I just want to recognize those sponsors that are supporting women's sport, and actually also supporting some individuals who are doing very well in sport. But I think the case that I'm trying to raise is that, can we do more? And not to ignore that other sponsors are doing their part.
Very important. And I'm glad we're speaking about them, because they need to, you know, they need to continue. And I know one of them, SPA, unbelievable, momentum, one of them. I mean, Sasol, we can, those are names that need to be celebrated, but we need many, many more. We can't just count them on one hand. It's not right. Gillian?
So, Leanne, I think if women in these positions of power could lift as they rise, it would really change the landscape of us. Maybe, like we said earlier, I'm sitting next to someone who has also struggled, but I'm so focused on what I've been through. And maybe if I'm elevated, lift as I rise, it could make that, you know, the journey of someone else easier. And talking about sponsorships, like you rightly mentioned around Banyana, I mean, they had to first fight before going to the World. It was the World Cup last year, right? Men don't have to do that. Why do we have to have collective action? Why do we have to amplify our voices in the way that they had to before we get people around the table to endorse us? Why do we have to fight so hard why do we have to prove ourselves all the time, even on with sporting codes, yet we outperform men when it comes to these kinds of competitions?
And that's the reality. So let's move away from that, and I want to talk about education, because we need to touch on that. It's an important one. We saw what's happening at Pretoria Girls High. You're in a private school, a beautiful school that not many can afford to go to. I personally can't afford to go to that school either for my kids, because it is, you know, you have a certain standard, and we have that's all over the world. It happens like that. And yet there is still this racism that is happening in these schools. I mean, Pretoria Girls is just one example. Why is this allowed in our schools still? You have a younger generation that are coming up, and we're praying and hoping that they don't see color. But is it something that they learn at home? Is it something that they're taught at school? Is it that the decision makers are not decision makers of color that are making these rules to suit them? What do you believe fundamentally is going wrong in the schooling system that we still have this awful racism and at university level?
Look, I think schools are but a microcosm of society. And so what you see manifest is no different to what is happening in broader society. It's just a flashpoint that's under scrutiny, particularly in so-called elite schools such as Rodin. I'm very proud that ISASA is emphatic to be an ISASA school, which is the Independent Schools Association of South Africa. You do have to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of us make that manifest in different ways. A lot of us are working with inner city schools or neighboring schools that are less advantaged to ensure that we are sharing of what we have in terms of resources, skills, and so forth. And a number of us run academies. A number of us are also acknowledging something that is common beyond elite institutions and schools. And that is the fact that we have a very frustrated youth. We have a youth that is not optimistic. We have training systems that focus too narrowly on matric. We are not doing enough in the TVET sector. We don't have enough artisans in the country. So skills that solve the problems of our country are not in abundant supply. And when it comes to racism and racist issues, I think that we have not developed the DNA to properly honor one another and each other's common humanity. And I think as there are flashpoints of polarization that are started by any one thing, let's consider the events of 7 October last year in Israel and Palestine. Those come back into our societies, schools being part of society, the debates will happen, and there are some unfinished stories. There are some people who feel they've been left behind. There are some people who feel they haven't been heard. There are some people who feel dishonored even within the space. There's resentment around access to schooling, for instance. We work very hard to ensure that we have a high proportion of students from underprivileged backgrounds who otherwise wouldn't afford the school, who have sponsorships to come into the school, and I acknowledge entities like Bidvest that make that possible, and a host of other partners. So there are a number of things, I think, amongst the youth, where the youth feel they have no voice. And even when we are talking about policy and policies that affect their lives, they're outside of that conversation. And we believe somebody else can better have that conversation on their behalf when we are talking about the lived experience of young people. I do think that from a social development perspective, we've got to pause and give the space for young people to express themselves, listen, and act accordingly.
I want to give each one like 30 seconds to wrap up, and I'm going to take that as your wrap up because I'm looking at the time. We've got to say goodbye. We haven't even spoken about gender-based violence, and I hope somebody will bring that up in their quick 30-second closing, because gender-based violence is the biggest scourge, and it happens to those that are in their houses. Every 11 minutes, somebody is murdered by a family member. That is another problem that is huge for women. Please wrap it up for us from your side.
I think we just need to be very careful. Whatever we do does not marginalize another part of the community. Gender-based violence is a scourge. My concern is that when we start talking about only things for young girls and not including the young guys, that we will have a generation of younger men coming through that are angry because they've not had their own opportunity. So just whatever we do, we don't want to perpetuate that. We want to deal with the issue. Yes, we've got the gender-based violence. Things are starting to happen there. And I'm hoping that we will be able to take care of that.
Okay. Nikki?
gender-based violence is going to take longer than 30 seconds, so I'll deal with something else. I think in the legal industry, we have something called deputy syndrome, and I think women mustn't accept that. They're always second to a man. Particularly, you see it in the judiciary, and I would have to, of course, say we're absolutely ecstatic about the appointment of Chief Justice Meyer.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's just amazing. But women mustn't accept the fact that, you know, you can be associates and senior associates, but as you get closer to the top, we see very few partners, and we mustn't accept that.
Love that. No more deputy syndrome. Quickly.
Yes, from my side, I just want to go back to what Colleen was saying about sharing our stories. And what we are doing as Women in Sport Foundation, we realize that most of women don't apply for positions and for boards because of whatever reasons they are having. And we started bringing women who are experienced closer to them. So every year we do run a Future Leaders Masterclass, and where we actually share our experiences and prepare women for leadership. And we have seen that producing a lot of leaders, because of most of them now are applying for positions and getting those positions and doing very well.
Excellent. Final word, Gillian.
I'm going to touch quickly on gender-based violence. I don't think we can celebrate freedom and gains and strides when we don't feel free as women in the country that we are in, Leanne.
All right, we've got to leave it there, ladies. Thank you. Thank you so much for your views. We'll never have enough time, we won't. But what we've touched on, I hope that this resonates with you. Thank you so much for watching. Have a beautiful Women's Day tomorrow. And let me quickly hand it back to Sakina as well. Bye-bye from us.